Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm Rob Calvarowski, and as always, the yang to my yin is here, Susan Hobson. Susan, how are you?
I am so fired up for our very last LLP podcast, 1.0 version, that is. I know I was saying that last week, but I was referring to our last, me and you, last podcast, flying solo. And now, of course, we had to bring the very voice that you hear every week welcoming you to this show for purpose-driven leaders. That's right. That voice is none other than Lauren Williams,
Mm.
our lead brain training for athletes coach. She also helps Robert and I in the leadership locker rooms that we do on the corporate side of the business. For such a young woman. Oh, and of course, I have to remember, I'd be remiss if I didn't include the most recent accolade, which is that she is now going to be the youngest coach, not just female coach, youngest coach in the PWHL, the new Professional Women's Hockey League, representing for New York, Lauren
The Raging
Williams.
Cajuns out of New York City. And future Olympic gold medalist coach coming down the pipeline, Lauren Williams, of course.
Oh,
Oh, put it on the map, man.
Good thing you know how to handle all that pressure, eh, Lou?
Was ready for it, born for it.
Lou's her nickname in our Dream Team locker room. It's an acronym for her initials. And I have to also include, like, Lou was one of my youngest clients ever to come to this table at 13 years old when she first got recruited to go away to prep school as a young up-and-coming hockey player here in Canada. She's been doing the mental skills work for a damn long time, even though she's so young. So Lauren, welcome to the last show. It's such an honor to have you.
No, thank you. It's kind of funny. I actually forgot that I recorded the intro for the podcast. So I'm going to have, because whenever I listen to it, I like go through the intro. I think that's a subconscious thing. Like I don't want to listen to my own voice. I just get right into the conversation and I totally forgot that I recorded the intro. So, wow, full circle moment.
Full circle moment. And the reason we wanted to bring Lauren in today is not only because we've had this very exciting news that we've been celebrating all summer long since it's been announced here in our Dream Team locker room. But yeah, we're very excited here at Team Elite because you've been doing such amazing game-changing work in our corporate leadership locker rooms that we just couldn't believe it took us so long to connect these dots. But yeah, I think, everything that we've been trying to do, you and I, Lauren, on the athletic side of our business, right, which is get back down into the grassroots of our sport, get back into those trenches, because they are trenches still from a mental health perspective, from a physical perspective. We've been trying our best to get in there and really prop the athletes up as best as we can, like we did for you when you were 13. But yeah, I think we're really excited to bring you in and talk about how now, similar to how I was doing that early on in my career and then identified I had to get to the leader's mindset to really affect change. We've decided to do that on the athletic side of things too, coming down the pipeline this fall, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the main motivators for me getting into coaching hockey, it wasn't, the X's and O's of hockey that I love hockey that much. It was about the opportunity to impact whether it's the student athletes or professional athletes that you're working with on the mental side and be able to share this wealth of knowledge that I've gotten through experience and through doing this work. But you get into it and you're with a team and you see that impact with the team, but then you quickly find out that, the same issues that you've been working on with your individual team and your athletes are present everywhere. Mm-hmm. And the desire to better the game and leave it in a better place than I found it doesn't end and begin with one team. And I think being able to work with coaches and get into this sports leadership that we're going to talk a lot about today is kind of where we're trying to pivot so that you can have a little bit more of that global impact and start to spread the ripple effect a little bit more than just on an individual basis.
Like let's talk about that a little bit, Lauren. Like we did a program for Stonehill, and
Mm-hmm.
as I was working with some of the assistant and head coaches, I was learning about they're encountering a lot of the similar struggles that we see in our leadership locker rooms all the time. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, when we talk about leadership, the leader has to be the front and center. They have to be the model. They have to be creating the environment that is helping folks thrive. Can you talk a little bit about, like, now that you're a coach, like what do you see the other coaches around you experience, and then also how are you supporting them?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I think you can say for a lot of people that listen to this podcast, they're obviously in the business world, right? So maybe they don't have as much of an intimate knowledge of how sports actually work on the back end. But that relationship between coach and mid-level manager in a corporation is way more similar than I think a lot of folks realize.
Mm-hmm.
And sport is a business, even at like the high school and college level. It is very much a business where you're worried about revenue, you're worried about budgets, and you're still trying to make the people around you happy. It just happens to be student athletes and not, full blown adults. And
Not
I
till
think what
now.
I
Now
see
they're full grown adults, Lauren.
now, they're full grown adults. Yeah, yeah. Um, but what I see with coaches, especially, once you get into that college and professional level, is the same stuff that we see with our corporate leaders: high levels of burnout, an intense amount of care and passion for what they do, but a lack of knowledge for how to balance that passion and the workload that is it's never gonna go anywhere. It's always gonna be there. There's always things to do, but finding a way to balance that with life, for example. A lot of people don't know this, but divorce rates are very high among elite level coaches. And it's because the sport that we coach becomes everything. And
Mm-hmm.
they're so singularly focused, it becomes hard to, I mean, it sounds oversimplified, but to have a life and to take care of other areas of your life. So burnout is really common. Just constant stress that's at levels that are not healthy is really common. Anything that you see in the corporate space is going to be present in elite level athletics.
And let's break this down a little bit just in terms of the ripple effect of
Mm-hmm.
all our coaches being so burnt out. Because I remember this back in the day when I was working with some of the coaches in the athletic space. Like that was their number one complaint, right? Is that they just
Mm-hmm.
did not have the capacity to show up in a high performance state. And I know we talk about this all the time on this show in every corporate locker room we do with our leaders is that the model carries the most weight. So if 40%, I think, of coaches was the stat you shared with me off air earlier are burnt
Mm-hmm.
out. What
Yeah.
is the ripple effect of that in a high performance locker room?
Oh my gosh. It's hard to put a number to, right? Like I can't sit here and tell you that it impacts 50% of athletes or it negatively impacts people's experience to this amount. But think about how or I guess I would encourage people to think about how they show up when they're mentally exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing goes for corporate locker rooms, right? You have your goals that you have to hit, you have quotas, you have XYZ expectations. The
Mm-hmm.
same thing exists in sport. And it gets even more magnified because for coaches at elite level, the outcome that you're trying to get are wins,
Mm-hmm.
or they're athletes on the podium or in the top 10. And if you're not getting that, then why is the university or your professional team paying you? You get fired if you're not getting those results. So
Mm-hmm.
when you create this perfect storm of, you know, the same thing you experience in the corporate workforce, which is feeling like you're trying to do so much with limited resources, it's always there.
Mm-hmm.
In the university space, there truly are resources
Mm-hmm.
that coaches have resigned themselves to feeling like they're never going to get.
Mm-hmm.
And you get this sense of, all right, well, I have to make it work. And I have the weight of getting these outcomes on my shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And you do more work, you do extra this, you try to be the best that you can for your athletes. But then, of course, your battery drains and you show up as a version of yourself that's not what it could be. It might still be beneficial, but when push comes to shove and you're mentally exhausted and that extra thing happens, you end up eroding that trust that you've spent so long building with a group of individuals that you're asking to run through a brick wall for you.
Literally.
So if you're in that kind of environment where you as the coach are saying, I need you to execute on this. This is the game plan. We need to do it. Part of it is going to suck because it's hard work, like physically exhausting for the athletes. You need total buy-in. And if you're showing up in a headspace that doesn't allow you to reinforce that trust every single day, it's really hard to create that kind of buy-in with your athletes. And if you don't have buy-in, you're not going to get the results that you want. But it's sad because these coaches get to this point because they're coming from such a good place. I want to get more resources. I want to be able to do this. I want to be able to do that. Create the best experience possible. But they run themselves into the ground trying to do it.
Hence the burnout, right? Because burnout is described as like that psychological distancing or disengagement that just the brain takes over. It's in survival, right? So it's like trying to protect you by like creating some distance from work. But then that distance, we always say model carries the most weight because that's a felt sense for your athletes. They can sense that distance too. And that's why Gallup says that 70% of engagement variance comes directly from the direct manager, which in this context is the coach themselves. So we know that's the ripple effect. If the coach is burning out and disengaging, so too shall your athletes. Right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I guarantee you, if you talk to any student athlete in college, why they're at that school, if they got recruited for a sport, at least half of that reasoning is going to be the coach.
Amen.
That coach is so impactful on their experience, not just as an athlete, but throughout their entire college career. So that relationship is one that has to be maintained and fostered and cared for throughout those 4 or 5 years. And it's really hard to when you're on the brink of burnout.
I think something that we're seeing a lot, especially in the executive space, is just the lack of time. And it's executives are promoted, CEOs, the turnover's never been higher. The amount of time that executives have to generate results and succeed has never been shorter. And I mean, you're seeing this in coaching, like professional coaching, like I see it in the NFL, where coaches are like, there was literally a few coaches last year that were fired after like 4 games. Right. And
really?
It's like, well, there was a lot
extreme.
going on, but it's that is just a message for folks out there, right? And we see this, Susan, in the leadership space, is like, if you're not getting development until you're 42, it's, you need to do it yourself, because when you get that chance at 42 to step into your executive role, you have to be ready and you have to be delivering in like the first 6 months. Because if you're not, you're out the door. And Lauren, like, you see that, right? And it's like, I think for folks out there, like if you're coaching or you're managing people, or you want to be an executive, you want to be an Olympic coach, it doesn't really matter. The fact is, in 2024, like our brains are so wildly onto the next thing so quickly that you don't get time to do anything. And I think just from that perspective is, if you want to succeed, it's, you have to double down on yourself, on where you want to go. And that's like looking, and we do that. We talked about this last week, Susan, right? Future state, right? Look at Lauren. She doubled down on her internal work. She's the youngest coach in the professional women's league today. She also works with the Hockey Canada at these really high levels as well, right? And it's like, you have to do the work. so you're ready when you get the opportunity,
That's right.
not after you get the opportunity. Lauren, do you want to talk
Yeah.
about that? Like, tell us, like, when you got these moments where, you know, you were NCAA or your Hockey Canada, you were already ready. Like, tell us about that confidence that you stepped into those roles with.
But so I think first and foremost, it always started with a healthy bit of fear and anxiety around it as well. And I'd be lying if I said that I didn't have a little bit of imposter syndrome around it. I'm experiencing it now, stepping into this PWHL job where, you know, I'm 8 and 10 years and 10 plus years younger than my colleagues. I'm younger than some of the players that I'm going to be coaching. Like, that's a reality of where I'm at.
Sure
And
is.
I think it's helpful for me to acknowledge that stuff, but to not sit in it. I respect the experience that other people have. And I know that there's so much learning that I have to do from them and that I want to do. But I also acknowledge that the experience that I have is different. And I have faith in that different experience because I've learned a lot on my own. I've had a lot of different experiences that they haven't had. And it's not that one is better than the other. They're both good. And having trust in the fact that my ability to blend my experience with them to create a better product is what gives me confidence. But that being said, I can't, you know, show up to Hockey Canada camp or show up to training camp for PWHL New York and wait for 2 weeks to hit the ground. Like, I'm going to prep myself before then. I'm going to have conversations with coaches and players to see what their needs are. And then I'm going to develop a plan for how am I going to meet those needs? What skills am I going to use that I know I have access to now that are going to help accomplish a goal? And that's, I think, where we lose sight of all of this, because you look at the big picture and everything, and it's a lot. But being able to chunk it down into smaller bits and actually identify, okay, what are the controllable aspects of my role here is super helpful, because it actually gives you a direction to move in. Where if you look at the problem as a whole, or the thing that's giving you a lot of anxiety as a whole, yeah, it feels pretty unconquerable. I think of, like, the NCAA right now is going through massive change, as we all know, with NIL and transfer portal rules and everything that's changing there. A lot of coaches are really starting to feel it because there's no more athlete commitment. Athletes can come and go whenever they want. Coaches can poach if they want to, you know, it's against the rules. So all of these coaches are saying, well,
Free
how
for
are we supposed to
all.
deal?
It's a free
Yeah, they're
for
like,
all.
free for all.
It's
How are we supposed to
against the
deal for
rules.
this? Where's my job security?
I
Like, we're all
know.
investing. And all of these things are coming up. And as a coach, my first, I guess, gut instinct is to say, why is nobody thinking about the impact that they have on their athletes? Like, this is the art of coaching. This is why I coach, at least, is because I know the impact that I can have on an individual. And as a coach, even in this changing market, you're going to acknowledge that there's going to be people that are going to leave for more money. That's fine. But if I can create a team where the majority of my athletes are there because they have a connection with me as the coach, because they trust me, because they like showing up to do the work, I'm trying to create that environment on a daily basis. And I have to have trust in the fact that that environment is going to bring the right pieces in.
So I have some very important questions. Can we just rewind this game tape about 3 minutes and just notice her answer to your question, Rob, where she was answering about, I don't know about confidence, but I certainly found courage. I certainly found courage, which is exactly right. You know, courage actually just comes down to, do I trust myself to throw myself forward and I believe that my legs will catch me, right? Like all of that self-trust that you have cultivated since you were, I think, before you were 13 and started actually formally working on building that from a mindset perspective. I think that is something that sports gives us, you know, like it's like game time, they drop the puck and it's go. And it's, do you trust yourself or not at full speed, knowing girls are going to come for your head, right? So some of that does come from the fabric of sport itself. But I just think, yeah, that self-trust that you have been working on from a mindset perspective since you were 13, certainly that's a massive aspect of how you're able to find such courage for such big, daunting things here in your 20s. So, yeah, where does that development occur for coaches? I'm curious because having played the sport my damn self for so long, I happen to remember most of my coaches just got recruited from their hockey teams, right? They were just past players who were good at the game and knew a lot about the game and the systems of the game. And I don't ever remember there being any type of formal coaching development. So here they are under more pressure than some of our corporate leaders, even in terms of the stakes in the NCAA. Like some of the contracts that these coaches in the NCAA are making, it's like being a professional athlete.
Yeah.
In fact, I think a leader is like a professional athlete, right? Because on the daily, they have to pull on a lot of the same mental and emotional resources that a professional athlete has to be able to access to be able to go and flow at full speed. But where along the lines, now we're in 2024, and you have been coaching up here in used to be the CIS. What are we calling it these days?
U Sport.
Yeah. Thank you. Now in U Sport out in Calgary at Mount Royal, right? You got thrust into that, as an athlete yourself. Where did you get development? Where was the NCAA or U Sport giving you formal coaching development to help you develop that trust?
It was pretty non-existent, to be honest. Any of the development that I got as a coach was more so through the work that I did here with Elite. And as a athlete, like when I was still an athlete, there were a couple of extra courses and speaker series that we got access to that helped show me different perspectives. But I mean, now there's the coaches convention, which is amazing. They hold it in Florida every year. And then there's also the NHL Coaches Association convention, which is great for the X's and O's. And every now and then they'll have an additional person come in and talk about something leadership wise. But when I went to the coaches convention, a lot of it was talking about, how do you explain strategy? Or why does this forecheck work better than others? And how do you coach it? What drills can you use to teach it? And all of that stuff is great.
Tactical.
And you, like, if you want to be a coach in Canada, even for youth programs, you have to go through safe sport training. How do you, essentially work with a group of young individuals without crossing any lines? How do you keep them safe? You go through, Hockey Canada level 1, 2, and 3 certifications, which is a lot focused on how do you run a practice? How do you structure a practice? How do you teach these concepts? And all of that is great, but we know for a fact that the influence that a coach has on an athlete is far more important on whether or not they continue to play their sport than whether or not that coach can explain a concept to them really, really well. Like, that positive coach influence was found to be so protective for female athletes staying in sport beyond age 14, which is the age where they start to drop out of sports at 2 times the rate of boys. So if we're talking about keeping people in sport, it's that coach-player relationship. But I was never, brought into a conference or a convention where that was talked about. I learned that through peer-to-peer conversations and through the work that we do here. I actually led a conference at Stonehill on developing these kind of relationships and on managing your own energy as a coach, to which at one point I said, on Sundays, that's my day. I don't look at anything hockey. I don't talk about hockey. And I was living with another coach at the time, and it was a rule in our house, like, we are not talking about hockey. And one of the football coaches looked at me and goes, in season? And I was like, yes, in season, like, specifically in season. That's what I'm not doing.
Exactly.
So yeah, you don't get that kind of leadership development. It's not, I think it's growing, but it's still not where it needs to be. We're still very focused on the X's and O's of leadership development, at least in hockey.
I think especially having come off the heels of all this Hockey Canada nonsense here north of the border in terms of the psychological safety in our sport, right? And then in
Mm-hmm.
terms of that Australian study that we were talking about off the air, toxic work environments can increase the chances of depression and anxiety by like 300% for folks. Is that accurate, Rob?
That's right. And it goes beyond this, right? So toxic environments raise stress. That's ultimately what it is, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
leads to 300% increase in depression, increased anxiety, increased burnout, and then that increased cortisol level over time also raises your risk of heart attack, stroke, major disease, and basically makes toxic work environments the fifth leading cause of death in the United States. So it's it's really really bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the misconceptions that people have about athletes is that because they're resilient, because they're hardworking, because
Mhm.
they've dealt with setbacks, that their mental health is better, that they're somehow insulated from things like anxiety and depression. But multiple studies have been done that show time and time again that athletes actually reported higher rates of anxiety and depression than their non-athlete counterparts on NCAA campuses.
Mhm.
And then furthermore, they were less likely to talk about it.
Mhm.
So you have this population of people that everybody assumes is okay
Mhm.
and is doing fine in the environment that they're in. But in reality, you have an environment that likely encourages higher rates of anxiety and depression because leaders aren't well equipped to handle it or to create environments that don't promote it. Let's face it, elite sports are anxiety provoking. There's a lot on the line, whether it's scholarships or jobs or the own expectations you set for yourself and the perfectionism that runs rampant in elite sports. But this group of people is actually at higher risk for not getting the help that they need. And I think that that's where this awesome conversation around, sports leadership training comes in, and understanding that coaches have such a huge impact on their players. Like this is what we call the low hanging fruit now. Like this is where we need to get in and start to do the work because they have such a profound impact on their players.
Mhm.
It's
Where do
so
we
it's
begin?
so like such a prime thing, right? Because we just had the Olympics, right?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And last Olympics, right? Simone Biles had the quote unquote
Mhm.
twisties,
Mm-hmm.
and she pulled out basically because of mental health reasons. And then
Mhm.
this time, as she was back in there, they actually showed her therapy dog. And so
Mm-hmm.
she has a really cute golden retriever. Um, but right, it's like she obviously did therapy as well, but
Mm-hmm.
she needed the mental resources to come back and be at her best again. Right. And
Yeah.
it was that weight of the world and that second Olympics where it's you're the greatest of all time. You won 5 medals last time. You have to be the GOAT of Olympics. And it was
Mm-hmm.
crushing to her, and then she needed that time to repair, and then she delivered again.
Yeah. Well, and even it's crazy to me. Well, number one, let's backtrack. I think the thing that I love the most about the Olympics this year was the amount of athletes talking about the mental work that they were doing. Like time and time again in their interviews, they're all saying, it was really about, for lack of better words, getting into the mental gym and visualizing and doing all these mental reps. But then on the other side, going back to the Simone Biles story, when you talk about getting the twisties, number one, she's like flipping in the air 4 times. You get the twisties, you lose sight of the ground. She literally doesn't know where she is in the air. What she's doing could kill her.
Yeah.
So every time she goes up and does that vault, there's a chance that she could land on her neck and die.
Mhm.
So think about the mental fortitude that it takes to do that. But because she makes it look so freaking easy, all of the peanut gallery is on the side, like, oh, how selfish. How could she do that? Like, yeah, she literally had the country on her back and said, actually, no, for my own personal safety and my mental health, I cannot do this. And that's amazing.
Mhm.
But not everybody has the courage to do that.
Right back
It
to
takes,
courage,
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
I feel like that's the ultimate in self-trust is like an athlete or even a coach being able to put up boundaries before they know they're going to get hurt, burn out, disengage, make a
Mm-hmm.
environment toxic,
Yeah.
etc. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's no
Yeah.
more high pressure, high stakes environment than what we just described. And so, yeah, performance anxiety is a thing amongst so many other things that are core and fundamental to high performance, right? We talk about courage, we talk about confidence. I mean, we're not even getting into motivation, but I feel like that's a byproduct of what we see is lost or diminishes when people start to disengage and lose trust.
Mm-hmm.
But I know we have to try and land this plane. Before we do, I want to know, like, so what do we do? Where is this entry point from a sports leadership perspective? Let's just talk a little bit about how we're seeing things as, in terms of the, because we don't believe in useless suffering and pain, right? We believe that pain is the opportunity for growth just dressed up and disguised as adversity. So
Yeah.
where do we want to take these folks, Lou?
Well, if you think about it this way, your experience in sport has the ability to go one of two ways.
Mm-hmm.
It can be an amazing experience that you get a lot of life skills from and a lot of transferable skills from. Or it can go down the other pathway of it was a terrible experience and you're going to do everything moving forward in spite of that. Or it's going to leave you with so much trauma that you're just not the same person anymore. And we know that former athletes make great leaders.
Mm-hmm.
94% of women in C suite positions are former athletes, which is amazing. But in my opinion, we're leaving it up to that, like a little bit of a coin flip right now as to whether or not you have that experience in sport that makes you a great leader, that gives you great skills moving forward. So if we're talking about next steps, I think it needs to become part of the culture that when you become a coach, there's some sort of investment in you as a leader of humans, not just a leader of athletes. And how do you teach this concept or how do you effectively run a practice? Like that stuff you'll learn and you figure that out. And in fact, everyone does it a little bit differently. But if we can help leaders identify, strategies to help them feel like they're staying on top of burnout, that they're not getting to that place, if we can help them utilize, 2.0 strategies that are human centric, that actually get the most out of themselves individually, their coaching staffs, and their players, that's when you're going to see the results that you truly want. And I think that's when sport becomes this amazing thing that we see at the Olympic level, where you have human beings that are accomplishing amazing things and that eventually go on to become amazing human beings later on in life. But it has to start with this acceptance of a need. Like this leadership training should be a need for coaches,
Mm-hmm.
not
Requisite.
just, yeah, not
Mm-hmm.
just hey, you're Jimmy's dad, so you're gonna coach the team and show up in, you know what, I shouldn't say this, but like show up in blue jeans for practice. But hey, you know what? I love all the dads that get out there and know what
Yeah.
they're talking about and want to help. But when you get into those higher levels, I think because the stakes are so high, we should be investing just as much resources into our leaders as we are into the players.
Amen, sister. Preach. It's literally the exact same thing that we're on a mission to affect change on in the Leadership 2.0 space here in the corporate side of things. Yes, folks, I know you've heard Rob and I try to make this case for 4 years now, but turns out, right, the athletic high performance locker room is no different than the corporate high performance locker room. It's all the same performance principles, just in different arenas. So we
Yeah.
know from the game-changing results we're able to help these Fortune 500 freaking corporate leadership teams get, right? It's like it all comes down to what differentiates us here at Team Elite, which is we start with self-leadership. Because if you notice, Lou's wise counsel, right, when she was talking about how she's able to step into Hockey Canada and the PW and all these opportunities coming so far upstream for her in her young professional journey. She said, we got to just focus on the controllables, folks. That's what it comes down to. And that self-leadership thing that you absolutely can control and yes, develop as a coach or a leader. Yeah, that's absolutely something that's in your control, right? So all we're looking to do is activate the obvious. I love that you're calling it low-hanging fruit today because it's absolutely the case that I feel like we've made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if that's, asking for coaches that are in the NCAA or in professional spaces, asking your organization for a budget for leadership development for yourself is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that it can look different than what's been, kind of shoved down your throat for the last however many years. Mm-hmm. It doesn't need to be going to a convention to learn how to draw on a whiteboard better. It doesn't have to be going to a convention to talk more about hockey. You can invest in yourself and it can be just as valuable as doing that other stuff. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's not valuable to learn from some of the experts in hockey, but it's only as useful as your skill set can take it. And if you're not in a good enough place mentally, then all of that stuff that you learn in those conventions is going to go out the door once you're under pressure or once you're really struggling to maintain any semblance of balance in your life and you're teetering on that burnout stage. No one wants to be there. It's not fun.
I feel like that's what we share in common, right? Having been former all high-level athletes ourselves. It's like we all know you can have all the talent in the world and then access the top levels of your sport. But if you don't have the capacity to manage the pressure that all of a sudden you're under on the daily, because you're only as good as your latest shift. When you get to the pro level, there's some stakes associated to that, whether that's academically in terms of scholarships, funding, sponsorship, contracts, like that's real pressure. So if you don't have the capacity, this is why we say, not we, but neuroscience now proves that performance is 90% mental, is because if you don't have the capacity to manage that pressure, that talent's never, ever, ever even going to see the ice. It's not going to be actualized in your potential.
And maybe just to kind of end on a little bit like of a story. So when I was at Stonehill, we were starting a brand new program. Tara Watchorn and Megan Myers had started the program the year before. They went out and did a year's worth of recruiting. We had, 23 brand new student athletes on campus, 18 of whom were first years, which is unheard of. We're walking into a season where the expectation is that you do well because, again, you're a brand new program. You're like the new kid on the block in the athletic department. And I remember at the beginning of the year, we're sitting there and we're trying to figure out, okay, what are your strengths? What do you excel at? What do you want to learn more about? And this is a conversation that we're having as coaches. And I stepped up and said, hey, new to the X's and O's here, super excited to learn more, but my strength is in people. And I think that I can be really helpful, not only for the girls on the team, for the young women out there, but also for us as a group. And it actually became my job as a coach to notice when we were at a point where we needed a break. And I would just hold up my hand and say, hey, we're going 30 minutes without talking about hockey. Doesn't matter what we talk about, but we're going to press pause. Maybe we went out for a quick lunch and just chatted as friends and then got back in the office and got things going again when we felt better. But it was wild what the ability to step back and say, hey, we're not having productive conversations anymore. Or, hey, we're all we're banging our head against a wall right now. Yes, we're under pressure. Yes, we feel like we need to win these next couple games. Or, hey, things aren't going well with our group right now, but it's now impacting us as leaders. We need to take a step back. And one of the things that we reflected on, and I'm sure if you talk to Tara and Megan, one of the things that they've taken with them through their coaching career is the acknowledgement that having that presence to say, hey, we need to press pause and leave hockey behind for a second was game changing for us.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how many people could work with two really good friends for a year under that much pressure in that much like of a strange kind of circumstance. Have the season that we did. We had a season over 500, which is not heard of for an inaugural program. We made it past the first round of playoffs. Like, and to still be friends after
Is a testimony to the boundaries police. This is why I always say boundaries are the difference between a high achiever and a high performer. But it's definitely the difference between a high achieving culture or team and a high performance one. High achieving, up, down, all around, volatility, right? And then the high performance is the one that's like highly sustainable over time, that rate of growth, right?
Yeah.
But I do think it does come down to the boundaries. And that obviously is the reason why y'all weren't part of the 40% of coaches burning out.
Yeah. And just being able to trust in one another, like, hey, this is your strength, go after it. You've got it. And there was never any sense of like, I need to hover over your shoulder to make sure that this gets done. It was like, hey, no, we've talked about it. We figured it out. You've got it. Go and do your thing. And that was applied to all of us. And the girls felt it as well. So, yeah.
That's the ripple effect, right? Of all that trust that you all built as a leadership team, which obviously from Lauren's conversation started with the internal development of that trust. But then, that's what we're saying is the ripple effect onto these athletes that determines the success, the win-loss, right? Record that team is actually going to be able to have. Lauren, this has been, so much fun as we knew it would be. Do you have anything else you'd like to leave our folks with before we land this plane one last time?
Oh, man. Anything? Well, I think just kind of on this topic for any of the leaders out there or sport leaders who are listening, the next time that you think about doing some development and your brain immediately goes to what sport specific thing can I do? Actually take a moment to ask yourself if you're truly in the best headspace to do that, or if you should be taking a break. I know it's wild to say take a break, but take a break from all of that self-trust, trust that you actually have quite a bit of knowledge there already, and then choose to invest in yourself and your personal development first, because we know that there's going to be so many opportunities for you to continue developing in sport or in your job role, but you might need to put in a little bit of legwork on the self side. And if you're noticing those feelings of, I'm not worth it, or this is more important, we need to get you into a locker room and definitely reach out to somebody at Elite to have that conversation.
So good. Robert, where would you like to leave our folks today?
Well, I mean, I've seen a lot of teams that take a break in the mid-fourth quarter, so you definitely don't want to lead one of those.
They could call us too, by the way.
Yeah.
But this is the secret, right? And it's not a secret anymore because everyone talks about it, but it still feels like a secret, right? And it's like Phil Jackson, one of the greatest NBA coaches of all time, had George Munford. And they did meditation. And if you dig into Phil Jackson, he's done like transcendental meditation. He's big on spirituality. Like, these are things that people know. Even Michael Gervais with the Seahawks, right? The mental game follows the people, and then they are the ones who do the work, right? And it's no different than if you're in a sales meeting and you haven't slept last night and you don't really feel like your product, you're good enough to sell your product, or the price is too high, or blah blah blah. It's the same thing if it's the fourth quarter and you're down one and you need to make a shot.
Yeah.
Get there first. Do the development Trust yourself. Learn. It's a skill. Trusting yourself is a skill. You can develop it. We can teach you how to do it. Lauren is an expert in doing this. Reach out, get that self-trust, and that's going to help you hit that shot.
Mm-hmm. The best coaches have multiple coaches.
Whew. So true.
There's
Right?
that meme in therapy where it's like you keep asking your therapist who's their therapist, so then you can get to the ultimate boss therapist.
Oh my God. And for all other things, leadership development and training, we're playing a role reversal. Isn't this fun? Please check out our website, elitehighperformance.com. We got the one-on-one executive coaching, leadership coaching for our athletic community, as well as you heard here today. But we have all kinds of fun locker rooms going on, especially on the athletic side of things. We got the brain training for athletes. We're certifying folks who want to learn how to be the brain trainer for the athletes. That includes our coaches. That even includes our parents listening out there. Anybody who is curious to learn more about how this mindset thing we've been preaching about on this mic for 4 years actually is the catalyst to awakening anyone in any high performance context to their highest potential. Because yes, folks, the mindset is what governs the behavior, and the behavior is what governs the performance and the results. So if you're curious to learn more, come find us at elitehighperformance.com. You can book time with me. You can book time with Lou. You can book time with Rob. We got all kinds of other Elite Dream Team coaches excited to meet with you as well. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Launchpad Project, soon to be 2.0 styles here next week. Rob, you want to tell our folks a little bit about
That's right,
that?
folks. So Susan was saying that it's ending. It is not ending. So
Getting a facelift.
Right?
It's
We're going to be changing.
evolving.
We're going to be
It's
taking it
evolving.
to the next level, and we're going to have 4 episodes for you next week, starting on Tuesday, since obviously Monday is Labor Day, but Tuesday through Friday, we're going to have 4 of Canada's fastest growing companies, their founders and CEOs on the show. They are an incredible group of folks. And then we're going to be moving the podcast to twice a week. The interview is going to be a little bit shorter, 30, 35 minutes, but we're going to be spotlighting the best brains behind the business. And don't worry, or maybe worry, the intro won't have Lauren anymore, just FYI. But
Bad.
she's never lost, and she's always welcome back on the show. Lauren, thanks for joining us this week. Of course, it's always amazing to chat with you and to see all the things that you're doing that are absolutely incredible.
We're so proud of you, Lou. Honestly, the pride well runs deep in this mama bear spirit right now. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And guess it's so apropos that we had you in here for the last of this version of the LOP podcast. There you go, Robert. Because we're retiring you from the intro. I didn't even realize that was happening. But thank you for your service.
Out with a bang.
Yeah, literally.
All righty, folks. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. And we'll see you a few times next week.
Bye, everyone.